I gave him everything, my time, my love, my hard work. And one day he told me I was wasting my time. That's when I knew I had to leave or I would lose myself forever. The words hit me like a punch I hadn't seen coming. I never asked you to do any of that, so I don't know why you waste your time. I froze, my hands tightening around the edge of the kitchen counter as if it were the only anchor in the room. It was late evening, the hum of the air conditioner mixing with the faint ticking of the wall clock, and for a split second, I wondered if I'd misheard, but no, he was staring at me with that calm, dismissive expression that I had learned over the years meant nothing I say will make a difference. 5 years. 5 years of my life, poured into a marriage that now felt like a house built entirely from my own sweat, my own labor, my own compromises. And apparently, none of it mattered. It had started so differently, so beautifully. Back when we were just dating, he had seen potential in me. Potential that I didn't even see in myself. He had told me to quit my corporate job, to leave the daily grind behind, to focus on my hobbies. I see so much in you, he had said. You could really make something of yourself. And I trusted him. I gave up my steady paycheck at 23, believing in the promise of a shared future, believing that the person I loved would also see my value in everything, big or small. At first, it felt amazing. I baked and painted and wrote, losing myself in the creative flow. And slowly, my hobbies became a small business. Money trickling in from online sales, local orders, weekend markets. It wasn't just about income, it was about creating something I could call my own, a little universe of my making. That money, my money, went straight into our shared life, travel, date nights, saving for things we wanted. It was supposed to be fun, supportive, shared. And for a while, it was. But marriage is never just fun. It's work. And work, it's exhausting. I took on most of the housework because it felt fair. I had time, he had a demanding military schedule. And besides, I genuinely loved creating a home. Cooking his favorite meals, folding laundry with care, organizing our space. It gave me a sense of purpose. But over the years, my hobbies became work. And not just work, but work that paid, work that demanded focus, deadlines, customer emails, payments, and planning. I even took a part-time job at my gym, just to keep a little financial independence, just to remind myself I wasn't disappearing completely into this marriage. Yet, no matter how much I did, it never felt like enough. I'd come home after a 12-hour day, sometimes 13, sometimes 14 depending on clients or shipments, and the apartment needed attention. The dishwasher was full, the laundry basket overflowing, groceries unorganized. And when I tried to bring it up, arguments, accusations, you're nagging. Why are you so uptight about this? I'll get to it later. But later never came. And then he said it. I never asked you to do any of that. I wanted to scream. I wanted to shake him until he understood, to make him see how absurd it was that I had been pouring my life into this marriage, into him, into the home we shared, and it was dismissed like it was nothing. I remember the day I decided I couldn't take it anymore. It wasn't like it happened overnight. This wasn't some fiery, impulsive choice. It had been simmering for months, years really. I had tried countless times to have heart-to-heart conversations, to explain how overwhelmed I felt, how I felt unseen, how my work mattered, how I mattered. I laid it out clearly. I cook, clean, manage finances, handle our schedules, run my business, work my part-time job. And yes, I also serve in the military alongside him. And yet when he came home, it was always his downtime first. Always his comfort, always his ease. And when that downtime spilled into weeks of neglecting his share of household responsibilities, I was left with the emotional and physical labor of everything else. I remember sitting across from him that night, the apartment dimly lit by the kitchen pendant, the soft hum of the refrigerator punctuating the silence. I had my laptop open, my notes typed out, chore list, schedule, income, time spent on each task. I wasn't being dramatic, I was being methodical. I laid it all out. Look, I said, trying to keep my voice steady. This is what I handle in a week, and this is what you handle. Do you see the imbalance here? He glanced at the spreadsheet, his eyes flicking over numbers, percentages, times. And then he shrugged. I just want my downtime after work, he said. And I want that for you, I replied, my throat tight. But I also need you to take care of your responsibilities here. Unload the dishwasher, fold your laundry, handle the small things that make a home function. He leaned back in his chair and smirked. I never asked you to do any of that, so I don't know why you waste your time. I stared at him, unblinking. My chest ached, a raw mix of anger, disbelief, and heartbreak. And in that moment, clarity hit me like lightning. I didn't want to waste my life on someone who didn't see my efforts, didn't respect my work, didn't value me as an equal partner. I want a divorce, I said. The words hung in the air, heavy, immovable. And then came the gaslighting. You're overreacting, he said. You're letting your emotions get the better of you. No, this wasn't an overreaction. This was years of neglect, years of invisible labor, years of being dismissed and undermined, condensed into one painful, undeniable truth. I deserved better. I didn't tell him how long I had been thinking about this. I didn't tell him how many nights I had cried silently, wondering if I was being selfish, wondering if I was crazy for feeling this way. I didn't tell him how much it hurt to realize that someone I trusted to see me, to love me fully, could dismiss my life's work with a shrug. Instead, I began to make plans. Quiet, methodical plans. I researched the divorce process, what would happen with shared accounts, our property, legal steps, everything. I started mentally cataloging every instance where I had compromised, where I had given, where I had tried, and where he had failed to show up. I wanted to be prepared, not just emotionally, but strategically. And even as I did all this, a strange thing happened. Empowerment started to creep in. It was faint at first, like a small flame against a dark wall, but it grew steadily. For the first time in years, I felt like I was acting for myself. My choices weren't about him, weren't about being a good wife, weren't about keeping the peace or avoiding conflict. My choices were about my dignity, my sanity, my future. I remember calling my best friend that night, whispering over the phone as if speaking too loudly would make it all go away. I can't stay. I just can't. She didn't hesitate. Then don't. You've been carrying him and the house and everything else for years. It's your life too. Take it back. I thought about that as I went to bed. About how many nights I had sacrificed sleep to make his mornings easier. About how many weekends I had spent running errands while he gamed. About how I had smiled through exhaustion because that was what a good wife did. And then I thought, why? Why had I done all of this if the person I loved didn't see it? Didn't care? Didn't respect it? The next morning, I woke up with a sense of determination that surprised me. I made coffee, brewed it strong, and sat at the kitchen table reviewing my notes. The spreadsheet was still open. The numbers, the hours, the tasks, they all glared back at me, undeniable proof of what I had carried. And for the first time, I didn't feel guilty. I would not beg for acknowledgement. I would not argue endlessly for respect. I would act. I had no illusions that the divorce would be easy. I knew he would push back, claim I was being emotional, claim I was overreacting. But I also knew this: no amount of pleading, no amount of compromise, no amount of invisible labor would change the fact that my emotional and physical well-being had been sidelined for years. And so, I began. I drafted letters to lawyers, researched financial implications, cataloged all my business records, and slowly, methodically, built a plan not just for leaving, but for thriving after leaving. I wasn't naive. I knew it would hurt. I knew it would be messy. I knew there would be fights, guilt trips, and countless moments of questioning myself. But I also knew something more important. For the first time in years, I felt like I was finally in control of my life. It was terrifying. But it was mine. And in that fear, I found a strange kind of hope. The following week felt like walking on a tightrope stretched over a canyon. Every step had to be careful, precise. I had made my decision, but acting on it meant navigating a minefield of emotions, logistics, and his reactions. I started with small, deliberate changes in my routine. I stopped doing the little things I had taken for granted for years. I left his laundry unfolded, dishes sat in the sink, and the living room wasn't perfectly arranged when he came home. At first I noticed him glance around with a faint frown, but I ignored it. I had spent too long catering to his comfort, and now I owed myself the same attention. At the gym, I picked up extra shifts, both for income and distance. I needed space to think, to breathe, to remember what it felt like to exist outside of his expectations. Every morning, I packed my laptop, reviewed invoices, handled client emails, and came home only to find him sitting in the same chair, controller in hand, staring at the TV as if nothing had changed. "You're being weird," he said one evening, throwing a glance over his shoulder as I walked past him, carrying a pile of dishes to the sink. "I'm just tired," I replied, careful to keep my voice calm. Inside, my heart raced. Every word was measured, every reaction deliberate. I couldn't let him see that my silence was planning. He shrugged and went back to his game. But I noticed the tension building. The passive aggression, subtle digs, the way he left socks scattered like little traps. I knew I had poked the bear, and the bear was starting to stir. It wasn't long before he confronted me directly. "Are you ignoring me now?" His voice was tight, defensive, something I had heard often before. "No," I said evenly, putting down my coffee mug. "I'm not ignoring you. I'm just reorganizing my priorities." He scoffed, pacing in the small living room. "Priorities? You mean chores? Come on, this is ridiculous. We're married, this isn't a list you have to check off like homework." "I'm not checking off a list," I replied, trying to maintain the evenness in my voice that I had spent years perfecting. I'm asking for basic partnership, mutual effort, respect. He froze for a moment, eyes narrowing. Mutual effort? I pay the bills, I provide for us. What more do you want? I want you to participate in our life. I snapped, my voice rising despite my attempts at calm. It's not just money, you live here, you share this space. I want respect and I want acknowledgement. And yes, I want you to help maintain the home we both live in. He crossed his arms and leaned against the wall, shaking his head. You're overreacting. You're letting your emotions get the better of you. This is ridiculous. And there it was again. The same line he had thrown at me before. Only this time, it stung less. I had rehearsed my response in the quiet of my office, sitting alone with my spreadsheets and notes. I've tried to talk to you about this for years, I said. My voice low but steady. And I'm done trying to make you see it. I can't force you to respect my work, my time, or my contributions. I can't force you to act like an equal partner. His eyes widened, but he said nothing. I didn't expect him to. Silence had always been his default weapon. Over the next few days, I began the legal groundwork in earnest. I made calls to lawyers, gathered bank statements, and documented everything meticulously. I wasn't doing it to hurt him, but to protect myself. I even started scanning receipts from my business, tracking all payments, taxes, and client invoices for the past 4 years. I realized, as I sat at my desk one evening surrounded by paperwork, that I had done this all while trying to maintain the facade of a happy marriage. And suddenly, I felt furious at the time wasted. The energy spent, the emotional labor given freely without acknowledgement. He noticed. You've been on the phone a lot lately, he said one night, leaning against the doorframe, arms crossed. Is something wrong with the business? I shook my head. No. Everything is fine. He frowned, clearly unconvinced. You're hiding something. I'm not hiding anything, I said calmly. I'm just organizing some things, trying to get my life in order. Your life in order? His tone was incredulous. Are you thinking about leaving me? I stared at him, unblinking. I had rehearsed this, but the truth still hit like a hammer. Yes, I am. The silence that followed was heavy. Not the comfortable silence of evenings spent together, but the tense, brittle silence of recognition, of a reality finally acknowledged. He opened his mouth, then closed it, pacing again, muttering, "You're overreacting," as if repetition could undo reality. I felt a strange mix of relief and fear. Relief that I had finally said it aloud. Fear because the coming weeks would be chaotic, messy, and raw. I started sleeping in the spare bedroom, a small act of self-preservation that made a world of difference. I didn't want confrontation as I planned my next steps. I needed space to think, to gather strength. Each night, I stacked my thoughts like building blocks: financial separation, legal filings, emotional boundaries, packing personal belongings. I reminded myself that this wasn't an impulsive decision. It was the culmination of years of neglect and dismissive behavior. Yet, despite the methodical approach, the emotional pushback hit hard. He started leaving passive-aggressive notes. Dinner is in the fridge, if you care, or laundry day. Or not? One note made me laugh bitterly. Thanks for existing, I guess? Another made my chest tighten. You're making this harder than it has to be. It was infuriating. How could someone be so blind to their own contributions, or lack thereof? I wanted to scream at him, to make him understand that his passive resistance didn't intimidate me anymore. But instead, I stayed calm. I meticulously documented every interaction, every note, every subtle dig, not for him, but for myself. And then came the conversation that would change everything. So, you really mean it? He asked one evening, voice low, eyes searching mine. We sat at the table, the glow of the overhead light casting shadows on our faces. Yes, I said simply. All these years. His voice broke slightly, uncharacteristically vulnerable. You've done everything, and you're just leaving. I swallowed hard. I've tried to talk to you. I've tried to get you to see me, to participate, to be a partner. I can't keep doing this alone. I can't keep living in a home where my contributions are invisible and my efforts dismissed. I love myself too much to let that continue. He looked down, chewing on his bottom lip. Silence stretched between us, thick and suffocating. Then, slowly, he said, I never realized. I thought. You thought what? I asked, my voice gentle now, tinged with sadness rather than anger. That I existed only to serve you? That my life and work don't matter, because that's how it feels? He didn't answer. And for once, I didn't need him to. I had my answer. In the following weeks, the legal process began in earnest. I met with my attorney, discussed filing dates, division of property, and the steps needed to close this chapter. I began packing small personal items, boxes labeled clearly with dates and contents. I kept meticulous records of everything, from the business earnings to shared purchases. Each action felt empowering, a reclaiming of control I hadn't realized I had lost. At home, the tension was palpable. We existed like two strangers under the same roof. Meals were quiet, conversations were curt, and I made it a point to establish emotional boundaries. He tried subtly at first to draw me back into argument, to make me doubt my decision. "Are you sure this is what you want?" he asked one night, soft enough to seem tender but sharp enough to sting. "Yes," I said. "I'm sure." And with that, I realized something vital. He had been allowed to define the terms of our marriage for too long. He had dictated my labor, my time, my worth. Now, for the first time, I defined my own terms. I didn't know what the coming months would hold. I didn't know if there would be anger, tears, manipulation. But I knew one thing with absolute certainty. I was no longer living for someone who couldn't see me. I was living for myself. The first meeting with the divorce attorney was surreal. I walked into the office, briefcase clutched under my arm, and felt an odd mixture of dread and relief. The legal world was foreign and intimidating, full of terms and procedures that felt like a foreign language. But I reminded myself, this was empowerment, not fear. This was control, not chaos. "So, let's start from the beginning," the attorney said, her pen poised over a notepad. "Tell me what you want to accomplish." I exhaled and laid it out as clearly as I could. "I want to separate equitably. I want my business and personal assets protected, and I want my emotional and financial independence." She nodded, jotting down notes with precise efficiency. "Given what you've described, you have a strong case. Documentation will be key. Bank statements, business records, any evidence of shared contributions and responsibilities." I felt a small spark of vindication. Years of spreadsheets, receipts, emails, all the careful documentation I had done quietly, were suddenly not just validation for myself, but protection in a very real legal sense. Back at home, things began to shift. He was noticeably on edge, the calm, dismissive demeanor replaced with something sharper, more desperate. At first he tried to ignore me, pretending life was normal, but the tension under his skin was palpable. I started finding my little acts of rebellion: unfinished laundry, unwashed dishes, a stack of unopened mail, met with muttered complaints and increasingly aggressive questions. "You're really doing this, huh?" he asked one evening, voice low and dangerous. "You're really going through with it?" "Yes," I said evenly. "I've tried to make this work. I've tried to make you see me, respect me. I can't do it anymore." He leaned back, running his hands through his hair, a gesture of frustration that I had seen countless times before but had never fully registered until now. "I don't understand. I thought we were fine. I thought you were happy." I shook my head, fighting the urge to roll my eyes. "We were fine on the surface, but the reality was different. I was living in your shadow, taking care of everything while being invisible. I can't do that anymore." The following week, my friends began to notice the changes. I had started spending more evenings with them, talking through my plans, my fears, and my excitement. I realized how isolating this marriage had been. Conversations that once felt casual now brimmed with emotional significance. I learned that vulnerability could coexist with strength, that asking for help didn't make me weak. "You're finally putting yourself first," my best friend said over coffee one afternoon. "I'm proud of you." I smiled, a little embarrassed. "It's scary, but I feel alive again." Meanwhile at home, his subtle manipulations intensified. He began leaving notes, messages on the fridge, cryptic texts during the day. "I don't know why this is so hard for you. Think carefully before you throw everything away. Are you sure you won't regret this?" I kept a calm exterior, but inside, a storm raged. Every instinct told me to yell, to fight back, to demand recognition. But I realized something crucial. My power didn't come from arguing, from proving him wrong. It came from steadfastness, from control over my own decisions, from unwavering focus on the life I was building. I began to schedule everything meticulously. Meetings with lawyers, appointments with accountants, packing sessions for personal belongings. Every night, I sorted through what I wanted to keep, what I would leave behind, what would be sold or donated. It was exhausting, and yet, strangely exhilarating. I was claiming my life piece by piece. During one particularly tense evening, he cornered me in the kitchen. "Why can't you just talk to me? Why do you have to go straight to lawyers?" "Because talking didn't work," I said softly but firmly. "I've been talking for years. I've been ignored, dismissed, belittled. I'm done." His eyes narrowed, and for a moment I saw a flicker of something I hadn't seen before. Fear, perhaps, or maybe recognition that he couldn't control me anymore. "You're being ridiculous," he muttered, turning away. I didn't follow. I didn't engage. That was the point. He had no power over my choices anymore. In parallel, I had to navigate the practicalities of our finances. The military allowance he received covered most household expenses, but the leftover money in our joint account was a source of tension. I started tracking every deposit, every withdrawal, making sure that once the divorce was finalized, I would have clear documentation of contributions and spending. I realized how much of my energy had been spent on managing this invisible accounting in my head for years. Effort I would now convert into tangible security. At the same time, my business began to grow in ways I hadn't expected. Freed from the constant emotional labor at home, I started taking on new clients, expanding my services, and even hiring a part-time assistant. It felt surreal to watch the hours I had poured into hobbies become an engine of independence and empowerment. Each paycheck, each client email, each completed project was a small affirmation. I could thrive without him, and I could create a life that was mine entirely. But the emotional toll was real. Nights were long, punctuated by memories of the good times we had shared, the vacations, the laughter, the quiet mornings with coffee in hand. I had loved him once, deeply. And loving someone doesn't disappear instantly, even when leaving becomes necessary. I felt guilt, a strange mix of sadness and relief, and the weight of what this divorce meant for both of us. One evening, as I packed boxes of my personal items, he appeared in the doorway with an old photo album. "Do you really want to do this?" he asked softly. Holding it out, I took a deep breath and shook my head. "This isn't about erasing the past, it's about protecting my future. We both deserve to live authentically, and that means living separately." He looked at me, eyes glistening, and for a moment, I almost faltered. But I reminded myself why I had chosen this path. The years of invisibility, dismissal, and disrespect had not been trivial. My work, my contributions, my care, it all deserved acknowledgement. And if he couldn't give it, I had to protect myself. As the weeks turned into months, the house became a battlefield of passive resistance and silent strategy. I kept to my routines, focused on work, legal processes, and self-care. I began to notice small victories, a client complimenting my organizational skills, a friend marveling at my clarity and strength, a day when I felt genuinely at peace in my own space. And then came the first official meeting with the mediator. Sitting across from him in a neutral office, I felt a surge of empowerment. He tried to charm, to deflect, to claim emotional dominance. But I was ready. I spoke clearly, calmly, and with evidence. The spreadsheets, receipts, and timelines were my allies, and for the first time, I saw him listening, not dismissing, not arguing, just listening. "I see," he said finally, his voice quieter than usual. "I didn't realize. I didn't think." "You didn't think," I replied gently. "And that's the point. I can't keep living in a space where my efforts are invisible, where my contributions are dismissed. I'm claiming my life, and that includes leaving this marriage respectfully, but firmly." The mediator nodded, taking notes. "It's clear that both parties have strong positions, but the documentation and clarity you've provided will make this transition smoother." As we left the office, I felt lighter than I had in years. The process was far from over, but the trajectory was clear. My life was returning to me, step by step, decision by decision. That night, back in my small bedroom, I allowed myself to exhale fully. I texted my best friend, "Feeling powerful today, like I'm finally walking in my own skin." Her reply was instant. "You've earned it, keep going." And I would. By the time part 4 began, the air in our apartment felt heavier, almost impossible to breathe. Every glance across the living room, every footstep in the hallway carried the weight of unspoken tension. We were no longer husband and wife in the way we had been. We were two people forced into the same space by circumstance, both navigating an end we had long avoided acknowledging out loud. He had become quieter in some ways, but sharper in others. I caught him watching me in the mornings, lingering at the doorway as I packed lunch for myself, folded laundry only for my side of the apartment, or reviewed invoices for my business. There was a flicker of something in his eyes, regret, maybe, or confusion. But it was buried under pride and habit. I didn't wait for him to change. I had learned I couldn't. One evening, the confrontation came fully, unrelenting. I had spent the afternoon at my part-time job, then swung by the store for groceries, and was halfway through dinner prep when he appeared in the kitchen doorway. His posture was rigid, hands in fists, jaw clenched. "We need to talk," he said, voice sharp. "About what?" I asked, setting down the knife I had been using to chop vegetables. He stepped into the room, tension radiating from him. "This divorce, you're really doing this, and I just don't understand why now, why like this?" I took a breath, steadying myself. Years of planning, months of preparation, and countless small acts of defiance had led to this moment. I could feel the weight of it all pressing down, but also the empowerment surging beneath. "I'm doing this because I can't live like this anymore," I said evenly. "I can't live in a home where my efforts are invisible, where my contributions are dismissed, where my life is secondary to someone else's comfort. He ran a hand through his hair, pacing the kitchen like a caged animal. Invisible? Dismissed? You're being dramatic. You overreacted. I provide for you. I take care of us. And I've spent years taking care of both of us, often more than you did, I replied, letting the words roll off my tongue with the calm precision of someone who has rehearsed the moment 1,000 times. I cook, clean, manage finances, run a business, work part-time, and still serve. And you? Come home, sit down, and expect the world to be ready for you. He froze, staring at me like I had said something alien. For a moment, I almost faltered, remembering the early years of our marriage, the man who had once seen potential in me, who had encouraged me to pursue my dreams. But I shook the thought away. That man was gone, replaced by someone who refused to see me as an equal. You don't see it that way, he muttered. No, I said firmly. I don't expect you to. I just expect you to respect my choice to leave. The silence that followed was crushing, thick with unspoken resentment and years of accumulated hurt. Then he spoke again, softer this time, almost pleading. But we could fix this. We could try harder. We've been trying for years, I interrupted gently but firmly. I've tried talking, negotiating, compromising. I've tried everything. And you've chosen inaction every single time. I love myself too much to keep waiting for someone who won't meet me halfway. The words hung in the air, heavy and undeniable. I saw something crack in him then. A brief flicker of recognition, maybe, that this was final. I didn't celebrate it. I just let it be. It wasn't about hurting him. It was about acknowledging the truth. After that confrontation, the apartment shifted. The passive aggression became sharper, almost desperate. Notes on the fridge. Are you sure you won't regret this? Emails left unread in my inbox, reminders that he was still trying subtly to pull me back into old patterns. But I stayed resolute. I began to set firmer boundaries. No late-night confrontations, no negotiations outside of mediation or lawyer meetings, no giving in to emotional manipulation. At the same time, my independence grew. I signed a lease on a small apartment across town, a place that would become mine entirely. I spent weekends packing, labeling boxes, and transporting items bit by bit. Each item moved was symbolic, a reclamation of space, a reclaiming of life. I even began rearranging the new apartment in my mind, planning furniture, decor, routines, imagining mornings where no one's comfort or inaction dictated my day. Friends and family became my lifeline. They celebrated small victories, getting the first box of personal items out of the apartment, successfully attending a mediation session, even handling a difficult conversation with him without breaking down. I realized just how isolated I had been in this marriage, how much I had sacrificed emotional support for the sake of peace and accommodation. Now I was rebuilding those connections, rebuilding a support network that reminded me I was not alone. One particularly tense morning, he tried one last emotional gambit. I was sipping coffee in the living room, reviewing invoices, when he appeared behind me. Do you ever think about what this will do to me? He asked softly, almost quietly, as if appealing to my conscience would sway me. I closed my laptop slowly, meeting his eyes. Yes, I've thought about it, and I understand it will be hard, but I can't let your discomfort dictate my life anymore. We both deserve a chance to live fully, and right now, that means apart. He sighed, shaking his head, and for the first time in years, I saw vulnerability. True vulnerability, stripped of arrogance and excuses. But it didn't weaken me. If anything, it strengthened the clarity I had gained. I wasn't leaving out of anger or spite. I was leaving to reclaim my life. The mediation sessions escalated into negotiation over shared assets. He tried to argue for more control over my business income, citing shared expenses and the years we had lived together. I presented my meticulously prepared records, showing exactly how much I had contributed financially, emotionally, and physically. I didn't argue with him personally. I presented facts, numbers, and documentation. The mediator nodded, impressed by my clarity and preparation. At home, tension remained, but my emotional armor grew thicker. I no longer flinched at his attempts to guilt or manipulate. I had rehearsed every conversation, anticipated every pushback, and was prepared to maintain composure no matter what he threw at me. The apartment that had once felt suffocating now felt like a training ground, each confrontation honing my resolve, each act of preparation cementing my independence. Then came the night I realized I was truly ready. I was in the new apartment, surrounded by boxes and half-unpacked belongings. I had just finished setting up my small office space when my phone buzzed. A text from him. I guess this is really happening. I didn't think you'd actually go through with it. I stared at the message, feeling an odd mixture of relief, sadness, and triumph. I typed carefully, yes, it's happening. And it's for the best. I wish you the clarity to see your own choices, and I hope you find peace. Sending it felt monumental. I wasn't seeking his approval or validation. I wasn't apologizing. I was asserting my boundaries, my life, my choice. That night, I lay on the couch in my new apartment, listening to the hum of the city outside, and for the first time in years I felt free. Not reckless, not elated, but free. The fear, the anxiety, the tension, they were still there, but tempered by empowerment, by control, by the knowledge that I had chosen myself, carefully, deliberately, and without regret. The divorce was not yet finalized, but the trajectory was clear. The confrontation, the emotional reckoning, the meticulous preparation, they had all brought me to a point where I could step forward without hesitation. I had learned that empowerment wasn't about winning fights or proving someone wrong. It was about reclaiming one's life, making decisions for oneself, and refusing to allow others' negligence or disrespect to dictate one's worth. And in that moment, I understood something profound. Leaving wasn't just about ending a marriage. It was about reclaiming identity, reclaiming dignity, reclaiming control. The day the divorce was finalized felt almost surreal. I woke up early, sunlight streaming through the blinds, and for the first time in years, I didn't feel like I was living someone else's schedule, someone else's priorities, someone else's rules. I brewed my coffee slowly, letting the aroma fill my small apartment, and sat down with the mug in my hands, feeling the warmth seep into my fingers, into my chest, into my bones. The courthouse had been efficient, formal, and strangely validating. Sitting across from him for the final signatures, I felt no anger, no fear, only clarity. The papers were stacked neatly, each sheet a tangible marker of years of effort, endurance, and self-advocacy. He looked at me, eyes flickering with something. Maybe regret, maybe understanding, maybe just the quiet acknowledgement that the person he had dismissed had finally claimed her life back. "So, this is it," he said, voice low. "Yes," I replied calmly, placing my pen on the final line and signing. "This is it." He hesitated, then signed his name. The papers were collected, stamped and folded, and suddenly, it was official. Legally, emotionally, practically, I was no longer bound to him. Walking out of the courthouse, I felt the weight of years lift. The sunlight on my face felt sharper, brighter, more alive. I wasn't just free from the marriage, I was free from doubt, from guilt, from self-imposed invisibility. I had made the choice, acted on it, and now stepped into a life that belonged entirely to me. The first few days at the new apartment were blissful and grounding. I unpacked slowly, carefully, intentionally. I set up my small office for work, organized my kitchen the way I liked it, hung art I had always admired but never displayed, and even rearranged the furniture just so. Each act was more than decoration, it was affirmation. Each corner I claimed as my own was proof that I had agency over my space, my routines, my choices. Friends came over, helping me arrange boxes, cheering on small victories, and listening as I recounted the final steps of the divorce process. Their presence reminded me that I had not been alone, even in the moments I had felt most isolated. Family called, offering encouragement, advice, and support. I realized that independence wasn't just about leaving a marriage. It was about reclaiming a network, a community, and a sense of belonging to myself and those who truly saw me. One evening, while sipping tea on the balcony, I reflected on the years I had spent trying to make someone else see my worth. The effort, the compromises, the invisible labor. It had been exhausting, frustrating, and heartbreaking. But it had also been preparation. Every late night balancing finances, every carefully folded shirt, every client email, every meal cooked. It had taught me discipline, resilience, and the power of deliberate action. The phone rang. It was him. My stomach tensed for a moment, but I reminded myself, I had agency now. "Hey," he said, voice tentative. "Hey," I replied evenly. I just wanted to say," he started, pausing, choosing words carefully. "I didn't see it before, I see it now. All the things you did. The work, the care, everything. I know," I interrupted gently. "You're allowed to realize it now, but I had to live it, and that's why I left. Not out of anger, not out of malice, but because I needed to reclaim my life." There was silence on the other end, then a quiet acknowledgement. "I understand." I set the phone down and exhaled slowly. That conversation wasn't about reconciliation. It wasn't about regret or pleading. It was a final recognition that I had acted for myself, that I had chosen dignity over dismissal, that I had refused to allow someone else to define my value. And in that moment, I felt powerful, centered, and whole. The following weeks were a delicate dance of rebuilding routines and reinforcing boundaries. I fully moved into my new apartment, arranged my schedule to prioritize my health, my business, and my personal growth. I even started taking yoga classes in the mornings, something I had always wanted but had never made time for. Each small act, each choice was a declaration. I belonged to myself now. Work flourished in ways I hadn't anticipated. Clients noticed the renewed energy, the clarity, the organization. I was no longer functioning on exhaustion and invisible labor. I was operating from a place of empowerment and confidence. New projects arrived, deadlines were met efficiently, and my business income steadily increased. Each success was a reinforcement of the decision I had made, a tangible result of choosing myself. Socially, I began rebuilding my life, reconnecting with friends I had drifted from, making new connections and nurturing relationships that brought energy rather than drain. The contrast with the marriage was stark. I realized that independence wasn't just a legal or financial concept, it was emotional and spiritual. It was waking up and choosing your own path every day. One afternoon, while reviewing invoices, I received a small package at the door. It was from an old client I hadn't worked with in months, a handwritten note thanking me for my dedication, precision, and care. "Your work makes a difference," it read. I smiled, a deep, satisfied smile. For years, I had struggled to have my efforts recognized in my personal life, but here it was, acknowledgement in the tangible, real world. I realized then that validation didn't have to come from a partner, it could come from the life I built, from the actions I took and the people I served. That evening, I sat on the balcony again, watching the sunset over the city's skyline. The sky blazed with colors I could only describe as fierce and brilliant, and I felt that same fierceness inside me. I was no longer someone who compromised until she disappeared. I was someone who acted deliberately, who valued herself, who set boundaries, and who followed through. The final piece of closure came unexpectedly. A mutual friend called to check in, casually mentioning that he had been asking about me, trying to understand how I had managed to remain calm, composed, and independent throughout the divorce. I laughed softly. "It wasn't about staying calm," I said. "It was about choosing control over chaos, dignity over dismissal, and myself over someone who refused to see me." I realized then that empowerment wasn't a single moment. It was a culmination of choices, actions, and boundaries maintained over time. It wasn't dramatic or sensational. It was deliberate, consistent, and intentional. Every spreadsheet, every boundary, every legal step, every night spent working on myself, everything had built to this moment. And as night fell over the city, I felt a profound sense of completion. I had faced years of invisibility, dismissal, and neglect. I had confronted the person who refused to see me, and I had acted decisively to reclaim my life. I wasn't bitter, I wasn't angry, and I wasn't lonely. I was alive, empowered, and finally in control. I poured a glass of wine, raised it to the skyline, and whispered quietly to myself, "This is mine, all of it." And for the first time in years, I truly believed it.